Greetings. I'd like to spend a few minutes focusing on Chapter 2, the nature and extent of crime. But first I want to jump back to Chapter 1 for a moment and differentiate criminology from criminal justice. According to your author, criminology explains the origin, extent, and nature of crime in society, while criminal justice refers to the study of the agencies of social control, the police, the courts, and corrections. So basically, we'll spend a lot of time focusing on theories and understanding the nature and extent of crime. And we have another course which focuses more on the criminal justice systems, an analysis of the structure and functions and problems and changes in, for example, police departments, the court system, and the correctional system. Okay, looking at Chapter 2, the nature and extent of crime, we begin to look at how we gather data, how we get an idea of really how much crime is going on, what types of crime. But please realize that these statistics are approximations, and there's many problems with the collection of data. One of the major sources that we rely on, especially journalists, basically is the Uniform Crime Report, or the UCR. And this is a report where the FBI collects data basically from police departments on the number of crimes, types of crimes, arrests, and the like. And one of the important things is to differentiate violent crimes from property crimes. For example, violent crimes would include murder, rape, aggravated assault, and robbery, while property crimes would include larceny, theft, burglary, motor vehicle theft, and arson. What I want to mention also is that it's very important to understand that there are specific definitions for these crimes that you'll see in your textbook, and sometimes there's errors that are made. For example, if someone comes home to their apartment and notices the doors open and their flat screen television and their teddy bear collection is missing, they may run out the door saying, "I've been robbed, I've been robbed, a robbery has occurred." No, actually a burglary has occurred. So you would run out and say, "I've been burglarized, I've been burglarized." And that's important to mention, because robbery involves either a threat or an actual, it can involve an assault as well. But if there's no one home, it would be a burglary. But if someone broke into the apartment or knocked on the door and held a knife and said, "Give me your money," that would, clearly be robbery. And it's also important to see how these statistics are presented. That we often will use crime rates, and the relevance of using rates is that standardizes so we can compare from city or county or state to state, considering the population. So crime rates are usually given in the number of crimes per 100,000 people, or 10,000 people, or 1,000 people. It's always important to look at the numerator and denominator. Make sure that when you're comparing, you're actually comparing similar statistics. And so you can see that there's a variety of problems that can occur. Obviously, the Uniform Crime Reports does not include crimes that are not reported to police. We also have other crime reporting mechanisms. One is NIBRS, or the National Incident-Based Reporting System, which some states use, which gives us much more detail on the nature of each criminal reported act. We also can conduct survey research and ask people if they've experienced victimization or their views on crime. And there's a survey called the National Crime Victimization Survey, which collects data on victimization. And we see the victimization rates, of course, are much higher in the National Crime Victimization Survey than the actual reported. Many crimes go unreported. And so you can begin to see that there's some advantages as well as disadvantages to these types of measures. Your author does a nice job of looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the uniform crime reports and also the victimization survey. And I think that is relevant to go over to see the strengths and the limitations and to see how it's used and how, of course, it could be misused as well. We have to be very careful because journalists and politicians may accidentally misrepresent the crime statistics. For example, the definition of a particular crime may change one year, and so therefore you couldn't really compare the previous years because the definition was different. It would be a very invalid method of making a comparison. And so that's important. I know sometimes people will say that high tourist areas, crime really appears to be higher because the tourists who are victimized are counted as if they're residents, and they're really not. And so, my suggestion is to have a resident only and a tourist only and a resident plus tourist. Have three. Make things a little more complex, but certainly we'd get a little more clarity here. And these are also political measures, and they're used in politics and sometimes in policy making and debates as well. And we can see there's different types of methods of collecting data that when we get into looking at research, and that's important to take a closer look at as well. And your authors talk about cohort research, or basically observing a group of people over time, and certainly following, a group of, let's say, young school children into their adolescence and into their adulthood takes a long time, but it can give us a wealth of information about some of the things that occur in their life that may lead to criminal or non-criminal behavior. We can conduct experiments to see if different programs work. And sometimes we have programs where one group receives an intervention and the other group doesn't. That would be the comparison or the control group, and we see if there's differences. And there's a lot of important factors that go into any experiment. One, making sure that we have random selection of subjects. In other words, when we choose from that population, we select a sample, because not everyone in the population can be in the study. We want to make sure it's a random sample so that everyone in that we've defined in that sample has an equal chance of getting in one group or the other. We don't want to say, okay, in our experimental group, the one that gets the treatment, we're going to select the ones that are most likely to succeed, and the ones who are most likely to fail we're going to keep in our control group, and they're going to get nothing. Well, that's biased research, so that's very important to look at as well. We can conduct observations and interviews. We can conduct meta-analysis and systematic review. For example, in meta-analysis, we gather data from a number of previous studies to try to find out what the effects are, what's going on. Also, your authors talk about data mining, and especially with computers, there's fascinating ways of looking at situations, and we can look at that. Crime mapping has advanced significantly. Our department actually offers undergrad and graduate certification in crime mapping, and I think that is a very, very useful skill to have, being able to conduct statistical analysis and research and crime mapping. And then also your author briefly addresses crime trends and some of the changes that have occurred over the years. And of course, we try to explain what might lead to those changes. And then the author goes into looking at some regional differences, focusing also on social class, socioeconomic conditions, and crime, differentiating instrumental crimes versus expressive crimes, and looking at the age factor and how people tend to burn out from committing crimes, or I'm sorry, they should age out, I guess we might say. By the time someone, by the time the mid-20s, to late 20s seems to be kind of that area where crime decreases significantly, and there's some different explanations for that. and factors that influence crime rates. And we're going to take a close look at those throughout the semester. And this wraps up this video.